Happy Halloween! This is Darren Shan, author of Cert the Freak, Lord Loss, Zombie, Archibald Lox, and a load of other books. Halloween's normally my favourite time of the year. Being a big horror fan, it's always been a very important part of my life ever since I was a young child. Obviously, this year things are a bit different, and whereas normally I go out trick or treating, go to Halloween parties, and so on, because of COVID-19, it's going to be a fairly quiet one. I think many of the rest of you are in the same boat. So I thought this year, even though I don't normally do stuff on video a lot, I thought it'd be nice to do a short video, well, maybe 10, 15, 20 minutes, just to hopefully brighten up Halloween for a few of you who, like me, are feeling a little bit in the dumps because we can't go out and celebrate as normal. So I invited fans through my Facebook and blog posts over last week to submit questions to me. There was a nice few questions asked. The first couple of days it was very quiet and I was worried I wasn't going to have enough to make it worthwhile doing, but a good few come in the end. So I think I'm going to be able to answer all of them without going too long. We don't want to be here for 2 hours doing this. I don't think my internet would upload a 2 hour long video anyway. So yeah, they've come in covering different books I've written, asking me questions about writing and so on. And I've broken them down roughly into a few different categories to group them together. But otherwise, I'm going to take them pretty much in the order that they came to me. I think I've got everybody who asked a question. If I've missed you out by accident, my apologies, it wasn't intentional. Okay, let's kick off with Cert Freak, which obviously is the book I'm best known for. It's where my career as a children's author began back in January 2000. It was first released. It's still my most popular series, it sells more than anything else I've written. So yeah, there's a few questions about my vampire forays. So let's kick off with Danielle, who asked a good question. Was I at all inspired by Star Trek's Klingons when it came to the vampires' culture, morals, and values? Particularly, she's thinking of Star Trek The Next Generation. I most certainly was. I'm a big Star Trek fan, particularly for Next Generation. That started when I was, I think, in my early 20s, and I watched it avidly. I think I've seen every single episode that was ever made of that. I've seen all the original series as well. Yeah, there are different elements inspired me for vampires. I drew on old warrior myths. I sort of took the idea that these guys have been around for hundreds of years. Their morals and their code of ethics would stretch back to old tribes like the ancient Celts in Ireland, or the samurai in Japan, or the modern day Masai Mara. So I was drawing on these sort of myths, but the Klingons definitely were in there as well. I wrote the first draft of Cert the Freak back in the middle of 1997, and I think that's when I was watching Star Trek. I might have finished that stage, but I was still watching it on reruns and repeats and so on. So yeah, the Klingons definitely were an influence on me. Star Wars snuck in there as well. You might get the occasional Star Wars reference or inspiration if you're sharp-eyed. Simon says he loved Lake of Souls. That was book 10 of the Saga of Darren Shan. And he loved its bizarre world. He asked what was one crazy idea that never made it into the finished book. For those who might not have read Lake of Souls, it's different to the rest of the books in the series. Whereas the rest of us set in a modern day world, Lake of Souls, the action shifts to this bizarre, fantastical land full of very strange creatures. We do find out at the end of the book where exactly they are and why this land is as bizarre as it is. I don't want to give it away for those who haven't read it. Pretty much everything made it into the book, Simon. I had a lot of fun with Lake of Souls. It divides readers. Some readers will cite that as their favourite, like you did, and others really don't like it at all because it was so different in tone to the rest of the series. They found it a bit strange. And it did play an important part in the series. It would have been more crucial if I'd stuck to my original plan. My original plan with the Saga of Darren Shan was to write between 20 and 24 books. The 12 books that we ended up with were basically the first half of the storyline I had in my head. And in the second half, it was going to shift into this waste world of the Lake of Souls. And so the book would have served as a forerunner of what was to come afterwards. I abandoned that plan in the end because what I realised as I came to the last stretch was that Darren's story was a coming-of-age tale, and it needed to end at the point where it ended. So even if I had ideas for the books, Darren's story had to end there. And I always try to follow my gut instinct when I'm writing. I have plans, but they sometimes fall by the wayside. My publishers have demands on me, but I never listen to them. Sometimes I do, but generally speaking, if a story demands to do one thing, I'll do the thing the story tells me to do. Derek wants to know, why has there been prolonged interest in vampires over time? I used to get asked that question a lot when I was touring with my vampire books. It was back around the time that Buffy was really hot. It was before Twilight came along. Twilight came along in the mid-noughties or late noughties, I think. But yeah, I used to get asked about that a lot. And my standard answer was, because they're cool. I think it's as simple as that. Vampires are just pretty cool, and we can bring different interpretations on them and write about them in different ways. But yeah, there's just something very seductive, I think, about the idea of these creatures who live at night and have to drink blood to survive and can live for a very, very long time. So yeah, it's not a very in-depth answer, I know, but that's my answer. Was there one more? Alexi asked, when writing Cert the Freak, who was my favourite character to write and why? I don't think this will come as a big surprise to anyone, because he's probably most of your favourite character as well. It was Mr. Crepsley. I didn't know in Cert the Freak whether Mr. Crepsley was going to be a force of good or evil. When I was writing the first book, he was very ambiguous. And I didn't have a series planned when I wrote the first book. I knew it was going to end open-endedly, and that there would be room to carry the story on if I felt it needed to be carried on. But I didn't have any big plans in mind. So I wasn't 100% sure if I did write a sequel, if Mr. Crepsley would play the part of the good guy or the villain. He could have gone either way. I suspected he was going to be good, but I wasn't 100% sure. And it wasn't really until I'd finished the second book and was planning the third that his character really began to come together for me, and I began to see the role he was going to play over the course of the series. He's been my favourite character out of any of the books I've written. He was very fascinating. I learned a lot about him, especially when I went back and wrote a 4-book prequel series, The Saga of Lox and Crepsley, because I didn't really know anything about his past. When I wrote the first series of books, it was all told from the point of view of Darren. And so we only see Mr. Crepsley as Darren sees Mr. Crepsley. And as a child, Darren doesn't ask the sort of questions that an adult perhaps would ask. And so I never asked them, because I was in Darren's shoes and I was trying to think as Darren thinks. But when I came to write The Saga of Lox and Crepsley, it was written in the third person. And that's really when I got a grip, finally, on just what sort of a man he was and what motivated him and driven him over the course of 200 years, and why he was the way he was in the original Saga of Darren Shan series. Sarah asked, will we get any other books about characters from the Saga of Darren Shan or the Cert the Freak? Because I wrote the prequels about Mr. Crepsley. I'd say it's unlikely, Sarah. There's a chance I might one day return to my original plans, what would have been the second half of that 20 to 24 book series. And if I do that, then we will see some characters who were in those original 12 books. I'd say that's unlikely at this stage, but I'm not ruling it out completely, because I could wake up in the morning or see something today that would spark something inside my head that would lead me to write a series. I never planned to write about Mr. Crepsley. My Japanese publishers, the books were very, very popular in Japan when they first came out, and they asked me to write about Mr. Crepsley, and I said no, because I didn't have any ideas about him, and I didn't want to do it just for the money. But then, a few years after that, I just found myself obsessing about him, and bits of his story began to come together, and I felt compelled to write. So if that ever happens with anybody else from Cert the Freak, then I will follow through on it. But I would think it's very unlikely. I'd be very surprised if it does. Okay, let's move on to the Demonata, my bloodiest and goriest of series. Although Zombie pushed it quite a way. Zombie I felt was more hard-hitting in many ways, because it was more realistic, even though it was big fantasy. The horrors in Zombie were human-driven, whereas in Demonata they were demon-driven, so they felt more fantastical, and I don't think it scared people quite as much, or disturbed people quite as much as Zombie did. But yeah, it's definitely my wildest series by far. So let's see, we've got a few questions about Demonata. Where are we? Do I have a favourite character in the Demonata? That was asked by Adrian. It has to be Dervish. Dervish in the Demonata played kind of the same role as Mr. Crepsley in the Saga of Darren Shan, although they were very, very different by nature. But I just love this idea of this aging punk rocker who was growing old disgracefully, and who had a really sharp sense of humour, and who was trying to do the right thing, but do it with a smile on his face. He's a sort of template for what I would like to be, hopefully, as I go into my golden years. Actually, I'm probably about the same age now that Dervish was when we met him in Lord Loss, mid to late 40s. So, yeah, I don't kick ass quite as well as Dervish does, but I'm giving it my best. Dylan asks, if I was to imagine the car gash as a literal weapon, what would it look like? I've got to be careful about spoilers, but the car gash in Dimnata was this weapon that gave mankind a fighting chance against these forces of demonic evil. I can't really say too much about it without spoiling it for people who haven't read it. All I will say, Dylan, is I always imagined it as it was, as it appeared in the books. So I couldn't really imagine it any other way, because for me, it was always going to be the way it was presented. And just another one I've got to be careful with. Sebastian asks, why was there no big fight between two of the central characters at the very end of the series? Sebastian did name the characters, but I don't want to do that. I like for my stories not to always go in the most obvious direction. It's a fine line when you write a book. You don't want to surprise your readers too much. There have to be things that readers can see coming. Kurt Vonnegut, one of my favourite authors, said a reader should always be able to see a twist in advance, otherwise they feel cheated. Now, instead of that, he did throw in some truly unforeseeable twists in his books. I think particularly on Mother Night, which no one would have seen coming. So it was a rule that he was prepared to break, even though it was a rule he stressed the importance of. So in my books, I try to set things up in a certain way that there will be things you know are going to happen and that you will feel satisfied about when they happen. But there are other things I try to surprise you with, to not go in the direction you're quite expecting. Sometimes I'm surprised as well. Sometimes when I'm writing a book, I'll expect the story to go one way and it will demand to go another way, and I end up going in a way I hadn't anticipated. That happened with the end of Lord of Hell's Heroes, the last book in the Dimnata series. I had expected, I knew the general ending was the same, but there was one element of it where one character got his just desserts, or I thought he'd get his just desserts, and it didn't quite happen. Again, going back to something I said earlier, it's a gut instinct. With a story, I follow where the story leads. I think those are all the demon-based questions. There were just a couple of questions about the Certain Freak movie. I know it divides fans of my books all these years later. It's been 10 or 11 years since it first came out. It was very, very, if you haven't seen it, it's very, very unfaithful to the books. I do genuinely enjoy it. I think on its own terms, it's a really neat little film. It's popped up on Netflix now all around the world, and it's got a lot of new fans. It's getting lots of really good reviews from people who never read my books, knew nothing about it, who aren't seeing it as part of the Twilight craze. When it came out in, I think it was late 2009, it got dismissed by quite a few critics who saw it purely as a cash-in on Twilight, even though the books had predated Twilight by several years and the movie had been in the works long before Twilight came along. Sometimes, film critics, they think a certain way. They think, oh yeah, they see a cash-in when they want to see a cash-in. It wasn't designed that way, the movie, but that's what happened. But it's grown in popularity over the years. So yeah, there are a couple of questions about it. Lucy asks, was I upset that John C. Reilly was cast as Mr. Crepsley? No. He was my favourite part in the whole film. I love John C. Reilly as an actor anyway. I was a big fan of his before he was announced to play Mr. Crepsley. And I was really pleased when they cast him, because I know a lot of fans have a very romantic view of Mr. Crepsley. They think of him as this tall, good-looking, brooding character. And in my mind, he was always, yes, he's definitely brooding and he is tall. But yeah, he's not really handsome as such. He's someone who's lived for a couple 100 years. He's had a hard life. I wanted someone a bit rugged, a bit lived in, who wasn't necessarily a standard leading man. So I was very excited, actually, when they cast John C. Reilly, because it showed to me they weren't just going down the simple, straightforward route. It would be very easy to cast, someone handsome in the role, and someone, an established star. But he went somewhere different, and he actually really loved the books. He read all 12 of the books. He tried to get the director to be more faithful to them. He tried unsuccessfully, sadly. But yeah, he really got into the books, and I felt he was excellent as Mr. Crepsley. And I thought the film really came alive when he was in it. I think the problem was because he's had so many successful comedy films, quite a few people now only know him for that. And so they dismissed him going into it as, why is that comedy actor being cast as this very serious actor? But no, John C. Reilly can do serious as well. And yeah, I think if he'd been in the hands of a more faithful director, we would have seen even more of the real Mr. Crepsney in him. But yeah, I loved him in it. I won't have a bad word said against him. And Lee asked, what did I experience watching the movie? The differences caused him a lot of resentment. I can certainly understand that, Lee, which is why I never argue with fans who don't like the movie. I can understand why. If you've read my books first and you see the movie, it can feel like a betrayal. I'll be honest, when I read the script, it felt like a betrayal to me. I felt very disheartened. I could see that they'd basically trashed my books and come up with their own story and were only very, very loosely inspired by my work. And yeah, it saddened me. Now, with the casting and the effects and the music and everything, by the time I saw the film, because I had that early exposure to the script, I went in more open-minded, and I did enjoy it on its own terms. I've not been paid to say that. I'm not under contract to say I like the film. They never signed me up to that, actually, which I was surprised about. So I have been free ever since day one to say exactly what I wanted. If I thought it was a stinker, I could say so. But I genuinely do like it. But I understand why fans of my books don't. And all I'll say is, again, on its own terms, I think it works. But obviously, I would have preferred something more faithful. There is a team working on a television reboot for the books. It's been going on for quite a while now. They're trying to get it off the ground. They're working on getting a script for a pilot in place at the moment. Hopefully, that will get the go-ahead and they'll manage to find a buyer to take it on. And we'll see Set Freak reborn at some point in the next few years for a small screen, which I think is probably where the story would work better in terms of it being faithful to the books. But listen, nothing's signed, sealed or delivered, so don't go hold your breath. But it's looking positive that hopefully we will get off the ground again, and hopefully next time it will capture more of the flavour of the books. Okay, let's move on to some other stuff now. There was a few questions about my other work, so we'll deal with those first, and then there were some general questions. And first, Stephen wanted to know, can we expect to see another Darren Dash book in 2021? And if so, could you tease what type of book it will be? Now, for those of you who are confused by that question, who are wondering who the hell Darren Dash is, it's me. I've always written for adults as well as teenagers. The first book I ever published actually came out before Set the Freak and was for adult readers. It was called Procession of the Dead. And it was called Are You a Marker when it first came out, which wasn't the wisest idea I ever had. But yeah, I always written for adults as well as children, and I've continued to do that over the years. A few books that I released for adults were published under the Darren Shan banner, but for the last 5 or 6 years, I've done them under the name of Darren Dash. I never felt comfortable releasing books for adults as Darren Shan, because what was happening was they were ending up on the children's shelves in bookstores. So I decided to use a different name. I kept Darren Dash, and I've released, I think, 5 books so far. They're very, very different. One of the things I like about being under the radar on the adult front is I'm not tied to doing a certain type of book. Darren Shan, my publishers always want something scary. Darren Shan the brand is Master of YA Horror, which is fine. I'm perfectly happy being in that bracket. But I've always liked trying different types of stories, telling different tales. So on the adult front, I just do whatever the hell I want. I've written a weird sci-fi novel. I've written a gory, over-the-top horror novel. I've written a couple of London-based gangster thrillers. I wrote a comedy based on William Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream. I really go anywhere and everywhere. There will hopefully be another Darren Dash book in the not-too-distant future, although we might have a bit of a wait. Basically, my new series is for YA. It's called Archibald Lox, YA middle grade, and I've ended up having to publish that myself. It's a fantasy series, and as I say, my publishers, as Darren Shan, they want horror, and so anytime I've come to them with fantasy, they've never been overly keen on it. They published Thin Executioner years ago, which is a big fantasy novel I wrote, but they did it reluctantly. They didn't really want to publish it. And this time, when I came to them with a fantasy series, they passed. So I've ended up doing it myself. The first volume is available. There will be 3 big volumes. I released it as 3 short ebooks earlier this year. And it's just actually recently come out as one big collected volume. I'll be doing a reading of that later on, so I'll show you the cover then. And because I'm self-publishing it, that takes up a lot more time than it would if I was simply writing a book and sending it out to my publisher. So I can't guarantee there will be a Darren Dash book in the next year or 2, but I'll try and sneak one in if I can. As for what it will be about, we'll have to wait and see. I will say I've been threatening for the last few years to maybe finally release my porn book. Bizarrely, it was needed for the first book I ever published. There was a publisher interested in it years and years ago, long before Cert Freak and even before I'd sold Are You a Marker. It's a book about magic. It's a really, really cool little book, but it does feature a lot of hardcore sex. And it's a book I couldn't have imagined releasing at the height of Darren Shan mania, when I was doing loads of school visits and so on. But now that that's all quietened down a bit, and I'm self-publishing the Darren Shan books now and stuff, it might be a good time just to put it out there. Although I know it's going to cause a lot of consternation among my fans if I do, because it's very, very different to anything else I've released before. Oh, it might be that. It might be something completely different. We'll wait and see. Zombie. Yeah, there's a fan called Bethan asked a couple of questions about my zombie books. The first one was about B's gender. B's gender isn't specified until the end of book 1. And Bethan wanted to know why. Was that deliberate? I don't think there's any surprise at this stage. B. Smith is a girl, a teenage girl who lives in London and has to deal with racism as well as zombies. But in book 1, it's written in first person, and it wasn't until near the very end of the book that it was revealed that B was a girl. Everyone reading it thought B was a boy because I'd written it that way, playing on people's expectations. And the reason I did it was 2 reasons. One, it was a fairly neat little surprise and a neat twist. I'd read about it in a book, The Turbulent Term of Tyler, years ago, which had done the same sort of thing. And that stuck in my head. But also, Zombie it's a very disturbing series. It's a very relevant series, sadly, even more relevant now than it was when I wrote it. It's about the abuse of power, the rise of the far right, about letting racists steamroll us into doing what they want us to do. It predates by a long way, the likes of Donald Trump, UKIP and that sort of thing. But it is about when powerful people manipulate the mass population. And I think we can all be culpable. I think it's very easy for people outside America to look at America and wonder, how the hell did Donald Trump ever get elected? But there are lots of countries where we've got the likes of Donald Trump. You look at what's happening in Britain at the moment, and it's very, very concerning. Not just the Brexit, but the fact that Boris Johnson is trying to override the power of the courts, criticising judges openly. It's all part of a plan to try and undermine the power structures that have been there for hundreds of years, and that prevent dictators and parties from seizing control and holding on to it. So, but I think we can all be culpable. I think we can all sway in the breeze. I think we could all fall for the charms of someone like Boris or Donald Trump. I used to love The Apprentice years ago. I thought it was very entertaining on it. I like Boris, who's the mayor of London. And, they're not people I would vote for at this stage of my life. But 10, 15 years ago, I might have bought into the lies and the deceptions and the fog and shadows as well. So what I wanted to do with Zombie was say to readers, look, we can't afford to take the moral high ground. We can't be holding others to account without first holding ourselves to account. We all make assumptions in life. We all have little Achilles heel and blind spots. And so one way of making readers aware of that and hopefully get them to think about it was by showing how they make assumptions with B. Smith, of just assuming that B is a boy because this is the way they think boys act. And then at the end, whipping the rug out from under them and saying, look, you were wrong. You made this assumption. Obviously, I led you in that direction, but you were willingly led and you didn't question what's going on. And we all have to question not just the world around us, but ourselves as well. And Bethan's other question, which I'm able to answer a lot quicker than that one, was in Zombie, were Josh Masoglia and Dr. Cerveris named after the actors Michael Cerveris and Chris Masoglia in the Cert the Freak film? Yes, they were. In my books, I name a lot of characters after people I know. Not all of them, but there's a surprising number of characters, and central characters as well, who are named after real people. In Zombie, most of the villains were named after people. Dan and Lord Luca were named after my wife's nephews. There were lots of other examples in there as well. It's just something I do for fun. And it's always people I like if I do name in the book. Well, with two exceptions. I wrote a couple of characters in The Thin Executioner who were called Master Bush and Master Blair, who were named after two infamous politicians of the time, the late 90s, early noughties. And but generally speaking, anyone I name in the book, even if they're playing a truly villainous, horrible character, is someone who I like, is a friend of mine or a work colleague who I enjoy spending time with. Okay, and Gage wanted to actually have a question about Phil Executioner, now that I mentioned it. He says Phil Executioner is his favourite book. Is there any chance of there ever being a film of it? Gage, you have great taste. Phil Executioner is my favourite book as well, out of all the books I've written. Very unlikely, I'd say, at the moment anyway, that there ever been a film. As I said a while ago, my publishers never liked it when I've come to them with fantasy. My agent never really liked it as well. I've always read widely. Fantasy, horror, sci-fi, they all mean the same to me. I love them passionately. But my publishers like Darren Shan, the horror author. And so we never really got behind Phil Executioner. Didn't quite give it a push that they gave to Cert the Freak and Lord Loss and even Zombie. So it's become something of a cult favourite. It's under the radar of the masses, but I get a lot of feedback from fans like Gage who, like me, see the merits in it. And I'd love to see it adapted one day. Hopefully at some point someone will come along who's working in the film industry, who's read it or looking to get into the film industry and decides to write a script on spec. But yeah, I wouldn't hold my breath, Gage, unfortunately. Okay, let's move on to a few more questions. It's going on a bit longer than I anticipated, so I'll try to go a bit quicker with the answers now. Cassandra wants to know what are my top 3 favourite books that I've written, and Ali also wants to know what's my favourite book or series that I've written. I couldn't pick a top 3 books. I've always said when I was out on tour years ago that books are like children to me, and no author should have a favourite. Sorry, no parent should have a favourite child, and similarly, no author should have a favourite book. But most of us do, and yeah, Thin Executioner is my favourite. If I could only keep one book out of everything I've written, it would be Thin Executioner. I don't have a favourite series, but the one I'm proudest of is Demonata, because that's the one that tested me the most as an author, and that pushed me way out of my comfort zone. And it was the hardest one to pull together that I've ever worked on. And yeah, then it was it's not my favourite, but it is the one that I have an especially soft spot for. Emma wanted to know which 3 characters are most like me. It's hard to say, Emma, because you'll find elements of me in virtually all of my major characters. None of the characters I've written about to date, anyway, have ever been direct representations of me. Not even Darren Shan in The Cert the Freak. Obviously, people think because we share the name, he must be based more on me than others, but not necessarily so. You'll find elements of me in all of them. In Darren, in Grubbs, in B. Smith, in the villains as well, Steve Leopard. There was strong elements of me in Steve. But probably the one who is most like me, not in looks, but in sort of temperament and spirit, will be Colonel Fleck in the Demonata. We're kindred souls, I think, me and Colonel. Cammy wants to know, what's my favourite part about writing? Usually the editing process, Cammy. I find first drafts hard work. Every writer's different. Some writers, they love the challenge of a first draft and they hate the monotony of going through it in the editing process. But I find first drafts challenging. They're really, you start with nothing, you've got to grind out every single word, letter by letter. And I write quite quickly, so I usually get through them fairly swiftly. But even so, I'm much happier on the editing. And I've got something there that I can work with and whittle down, and fly through, and get the pace out of. That for me is the enjoyable part. I'll usually edit a book at least 7 or 8 times before it gets published. And yeah, the editing is what I enjoy the most. Okay. Hannah wants to know, okay, we've got a couple of questions now which are not to do with the books. Hannah wants to know, what's the weirdest request I've ever had from a fan? I haven't had too many really weird requests. I get the occasional thing where someone will ask me like to sign my name on a shoe or a jacket or something like that. I've had a few people who've had actually, a lot of people have had tattoos based on characters or quotes from my books. Even in Death May You Be Triumphant is the most popular. But also a few people have had me sign my name or signed a quote, even in Death May You Be Triumphant, and then had that tattooed on their bodies. So it's quite strange to think that my handwriting has been immortalised in print on a few bodies out there in the world, especially as I have terrible handwriting. I feel a bit sorry for the people who are stuck with those squiggles for the rest of their lives. So yeah, that's probably the weirdest request. Gage asked, if I had the time for an MMORPG, which one would I indulge in? I've got to be honest, I thought it was a typo. I had no idea what that meant for, so I was straight onto Google to find out it meant massively multiplayer online role-playing game. I think that shows just how out of touch I am with the gaming world. I used to play computer games back, in the 1980s, very early 90s, but there's something that fell by the wayside, and I just don't play them at all these days. I do some things online like Jeopardy and not crossword puzzles, Sudoku and things like that. But in terms of, I haven't played a video game except a few things online with my son. Since I was at the late teens, very early 20s, so I can't answer that one because it's a world I know nothing about. And finally, we come, I think, this is the final question by Harvey. And Harvey wants to know, what are the most unique moments that my career has given me? And do I have a wish list of things I'd still like to achieve? As for the wish list, I just want to write more books. I've always loved where my imagination has led me. I love that it leads me to write different types of stories, even though some of those are far less commercially successful than others. I still love the fact that I've written books about A Midsummer Night's Dream and sci-fi and dark thrillers set in London and horror novels set in the mountains of Bulgaria. And I hope that I continue enjoying that and writing different types of books and going in different directions. On my deathbed, I'd love my final words to be, hold on, I just had another idea. But I've always had in the back of mind as well, I'd like to get involved in movies at some point or TV. When I was younger, I thought I'd love the idea of doing it as a director, a writer-director. I think I've probably missed the boat on that one. But perhaps at some point, maybe writing a few scripts and seeing if I can get going with those. But look, I'm pushing 50, so that probably isn't going to happen. But there's nothing wrong with having course changes in your mind, at least, at any stage of your life. Even if you're in your 80s, there's no reason why you can't be thinking of doing something new. I remember my grandfather, he's been dead about a decade, for his 80th birthday, he got a computer and he started learning about how to use computers and go online and surf and do databases and things like that. So if he could do it, I can certainly do that as well. So who knows? Maybe I'll become an enfant terrible of cinema in my 80s or 90s. As for the most unique moments, I've been very, very lucky as a writer. The success of Cert the Freak and my subsequent YA books really took me by surprise. As a young author in my teens, I'd want to be a best-selling author next Stephen King. But by my mid-20s, having spent 10 years really, really working at it, I knew how hard it was to get a break. I knew because of the fact that I like writing different types of books, I was going to be hard to pigeonhole, which would make it even more difficult for me to get bookshelves and establish the brand, which is what you need to be to enjoy yourselves in the millions. When Cert Freak came along and everything sort of changed and it mushroomed, and I had 15 or so years of incredible success. Sold 25 million copies worldwide. My life changed. It's been incredible. I've got to travel the world, visit loads of different countries. I've got to do events all over the place, meet thousands and thousands of fans. And I just got to seem a bit corny, but seeing how much my books have meant to people and how much they've touched their lives, that is for me the most rewarding part. It is the best part. I'm not going to tear up, but sometimes I do. Sometimes I read an email or a letter from a fan and they'll be talking about their problems in their lives, or how the books turned them around, or if they had dyslexia and weren't able to read, and they were handed Cert Freak and they found themselves finally being able to understand words. yeah, things like that, seeing my stories touch people. Because that's what we want to do as a writer. That's what I want to do anyway. I want my stories to go out in the world and have people read them and respond to them and get from the stories what I get from books that I read. And when that happens, when people write to me or meet me at events and tell me about it, yeah, that's where I know I've gone down the right path for my life, and that's when I feel at my freakiest, happiest. Okay, they were excellent questions. I think I've answered everyone's question who wrote to me during the week. As I say, if I've missed yours off, it was by accident, and my sincerest apologies. I'm only human, despite what Certain Freak might have you believe. So, as I said earlier on, I have a new series out called Archibald Lox. There will be 3 big books like this, 500 or 600 pages each. I released the first volume as 3 short ebooks earlier this year. Lockdown hit, and I just felt I wanted to get them out there. It wasn't, from a commercial point of view, it wasn't the wisest move we've made, but at the same time, it did get books into a lot of hands very quickly and give people something to read when they were stuck at home and unable to do anything else. So I'm not sure with volume 2 or 3 if I'm going to do that, if I release them just as one big book like this one. I'm going to wait and see. I'll see next year. But yeah, it's very different to my other series. It's full-on fantasy about a young boy called Archibald Lox who finds he has a power to unlock locks, and he crosses over to this other world called the Merge. And the first book's about his adventures there, wandering through it, finding out about it, and he becomes part of this very specific adventure, well, to find a missing princess, as this volume title does explain. It's not a horror series, but given that this is Halloween, there are a few scary sections in it, and I'm going to read out one of the tenser moments. I did have it marked. Here it is. So in this scene, it comes from very early in the book, page 55. Archie early on meets a girl called Inez, who lives in the Merge, and she explains to him what it's about. And she acts as his guide through this very strange universe. And in this scene, they're staying in this little village, an abandoned village, of little stone beehive huts. They got there during daytime, they wandered around, they couldn't find anything. Some of the huts were locked, and Archie, while he was killing time, opened one of the locks, but he didn't open the door, he got distracted and just left it. And then they went to sleep. And in the middle of the night, this happened. I bolt awake to nightmarish, high-pitched howls. I hear scrabbling sounds and cry out with fear, trying to scrape my way through the wall with my fingernails. Then, quiet! Inez snaps. It's only me. I fall still, but my heart goes on beating at top speed. Inez rubs gleam together, and I see from the resulting glow that she's drawn her knife and is waiting in a crouch by the door. What was that? I whisper. Hush, Inez says. But, please, Archie, she says. I think we're in serious trouble. This isn't the time for explanations. The howls come again, ragged and repeated, the cry of a furious animal in great pain or great hunger. Wait here, Inez says, and the howls die away. She rises to leave. You've got to be kidding, I huff, getting up and staggering after her. Inez looks surprised. You want to come with me? No, I groan, but I'm not going to stay here in the dark by myself. Have you ever used a weapon? She asks. No, I whisper. Do you think you'll be able to if we're attacked? I gulp, but nod shakily. She reaches down into her other boot and produces a second knife, which she passes to me. It feels cold in my hand. I'm sure I won't be able to do much with it, but having something to defend myself with lends me some strength, and the worst of the terrors subside. The light starts to fade. Are you going to light up more gleam? I ask. No, Inez says. We'll be safer in darkness. The light might give us away. She takes a step forward. Inez! I stop her, fighting back tears. Are we going to die out there? Probably, if I'm right about what we're facing, she says, looking back at me with a resigned expression. The whites of her eyes, the last thing I see before the glow extinguishes completely. Once outside, Inez keeps to the sides of the dusty streets. She advances smoothly, gliding along with barely a rustle. I'm making more noise, but she never stops to scold me. The screams get louder. We must be almost upon the source, but I still can't see anything. Finally, all my legs are trembling so badly that I'm sure I'm going to collapse in a blubbering heap. Inez stops and says softly, "There." She nods towards a beehive. It looks the same as the others, but my stomach drops because I'm certain it's the one I was outside earlier while waiting for Inez. The one with the locked door. The lock that I picked. I left the door ajar, but it's hanging wide open now, and something is crouched inside. The something is what's screaming. My eyes have adjusted to the gloom, and I'm able to make out a semi-human shape, but it's thinner than any human I've ever seen, as if constructed solely from bones. "What is it?" I whisper. "A hell jackal," Inez whispers back. "What's a—" I start to ask, but the hell jackal roars again, and I'm cut short. Then it steps out, and my teeth chatter with naked terror. I was wrong about the human-shaped creature being made just of bones, but its skin is wrapped tightly around it, as if a sheet of cellophane had been stretched over a skeleton. The hell jackal whines as it moves, and I get the sense that movement is painful because its skin is too tight. As the hell jackal stands, its face swims into view, and a choked cry catches in my throat. The hell jackal's lips are peeled back from its gums, making the teeth look more like fangs. Its nose is flattened out, just a couple of dark marks above its upper lip, indicating where the nostrils once were. Its ears are thin, jagged strips pasted to the side of its skull, and its eyes. At first, I don't think it has any eyes, but then I see that it does, sunk so far in its sockets that they're almost invisible, tiny, sickly orbs glowing a dull yellow colour, as if they'd been dipped in a weak gleam. The hell jackal screams again, and if there's a tongue in its mouth, I can't see it. The creature is hairless and naked, but the flesh is pulled so tightly around its frame that it's impossible to tell if it's a man or woman. It has long nails, which it scrapes through the soil, hissing with pain and pleasure. "Back up slowly," Inez says, sliding away from the hell jackal. "You don't think it's seen us?" I ask. She sighs. "It doesn't need to. Hell jackals have an advanced sense of smell. It knows we're here." I look at her with horror. "Then why don't we run?" "There's no point," she says. "It's faster than us. That's why it hasn't attacked. It knows we can't escape. It's toying with us." And that's where I'm going to wrap things up. The paperback actually just came out last week. It was only available in e-format up until then. You can buy it as a single volume, or you can buy it as the free shorter ebooks, the way I released it earlier in the year, if you prefer. The best way is as a single volume. It's the way I intended it to be read, and it's also the cheapest way of getting it. The ebook in America is $4.99, a similar price worldwide. But there is a paperback version available too, and there's also a hardback version. If I haven't seen that yet, it's on its way to me in the post. Alright, well that's where I'm going to wrap things up. This has gone on rather longer than I expected. I was thinking 15 or 20 minutes. I can see we're heading for the 3/4 of an hour mark. Hopefully you've stayed with me for the last 45 or so minutes. I hope you've enjoyed it. If I've answered your question, I hope it proved a satisfactory answer. You can always contact me very easily by email, through Twitter, through Facebook, and my website is darrenshan.com, and there's a contact form there where you can email me directly. I do try to respond to every email or comment that I get. It isn't always possible, but generally speaking, I do try and get back to you, although it's usually with a much shorter answer than you'll have heard from me today. And other than that, I hope you all have a wonderful Halloween, even if it is one of the quieter ones we've ever known. Stick on a really good scary movie, or read a good scary book. One final thing, if you did enjoy Archibald Lox and are curious about reading more, but don't want to spend money on it, the first ebook is free, it's permanently free to download online through Amazon, but also tomorrow on my monthly newsletter, on darrenshan.com, I do a newsletter each month at the start of the month called the Shanville Monthly, and I'll be running a competition tomorrow, giving away signed prizes of proofs of some of the Archibald Lox books. So if you want to maybe get your hands on it for free, actually that will be your chance. And it's going to be a very, very rare editions that I'm giving away. Okay, I'm going to wrap up there now because we've just gone over the 3/4 hour mark, and I think I've tried your patience enough. Happy Halloween, and I'll see you all again, hopefully in the not too distant future. Take care. Good night.